Okay, everybody, good afternoon. I hope you're enjoying the conference so far. We're on our final session now before lunch, so I'd like to introduce to you Angrad Morgan. She's going to be talking to us around the Gender Action Workshop. So Angrad's been Programme Coordinator at Gender Action since July 2023. She also works at a secondary school. She also is a secondary school teacher in Newcastle who teaches psychology, sociology, law and PSCHE. Angrad is studying for a PhD in education and social justice at Lancaster University and runs educational workshops for teachers and parents about online influences and misogyny. So Angrad, welcome back, and I'm passing it straight over to you.
Thanks very much. Firstly, I'll just share my screen. So these should be slides that I think that you got beforehand. Lovely. Okay, so hopefully, can everyone see that? Does that look okay? Okay, I'm hoping that you can all see my slides. So as I said, I'm Karen Morgan. So I'll be I've got lots of different hats, which is sort of which I love to be involved in lots of different things, as you can see. But today I'll be focusing specifically on my role as Gender Action Project or Programme Coordinator. But I'm also a teacher. So I teach anyone that's a social science teacher will know lots of social science subjects all at once, which is lovely. So I get to teach predominantly A-level and then lower school for PSHCE, which is great. And I also do some educational consultancy. So recently sort of made some slides for UK Feminista on online influences and misogyny there, which obviously is, a lot of you will know, is an ever-changing and slightly terrifying issue. So it was really interesting to sort of develop my knowledge around the area and hopefully help teachers tackle and address those issues. I'm also doing my PhD in education and social justice at Lancaster. So I mean, I've put my DEXI email at the bottom there, and if you put the camera on your phone, you'll be able to sort of scan using your camera the QR code on the right hand side there, and that will take you through to my virtual business card, which has lots of other different emails. So if you are interested in research or whatever it might be, then feel free to contact me on that email instead. It's always good to sort of chat with like-minded people in that area. So as I said, I'll talk to you today about the Gender Action Programme. So some of you may have heard of this programme or potentially been involved. So it was piloted in 2019. So it was focused predominantly in London at that time. So it was started up by the Institute of Physics, UCL and King's College. And they had recognised, as you will probably all be aware as well, about the underrepresentation of women and girls in STEM subjects. Okay, so this is thinking about your GCSE choices and your A-level choices, and then obviously progressing potentially onto university and apprenticeships. So it was supported by the Mayor of London, really successful pilot. So a fantastic programme to be involved with. So at the beginning of this year, DEXI, who are the logo on the left-hand side there, they are the Development Education Centre in South Yorkshire, so based in Sheffield, and they took Gender Action, the project, over. And we also at DEXI, I mean, I'm focused specifically on Gender Action, but at DEXI we also run other programmes like Philosophy for Change, Philosophy for Children, and climate change sort of workshops and school pairings, lots of different sort of nice holistic programmes that are also involved with my colleagues run there. So interestingly, DEXI is supported to be able to run Gender Action, the project, over the next 2, hopefully 3 years by Mission 44, who you might have heard of. They have organisations set up by Lewis Hamilton, and they support lots of different projects across the country. But yeah, you wouldn't necessarily have thought about that association, but yeah, he is the sort of primary funder for this. So it's really good to be able to keep the programme going and still be involved with it. So in terms of what we'll be looking at today, I'll talk you through the gender action programme specifically at the end, when I can sort of identify like how you can get involved with it. So I'll talk you through the issue that we need to address, so the impact of gender stereotyping, looking at sexual harassment, and then subject choices. So initially, as I said, the gender action programme was set up because of the underrepresentation of women and girls in STEM. But actually, as we know, it's a whole, there's so many issues that we need to look at. We can't just look at that. We need to look at the build up towards that. What is causing that, and what sort of impacts the experiences of our students at school. So I'll also then explore how you can become advocates and become involved with gender action, but also just involved with creating a whole school approach to tackling gender inequity. We're sort of thinking about like kind of reflecting on curriculum planning, policies, those kind of things. So as already been put up in the chat about the safe space, but this is a sort of safe space agreement that I always like to go by, and I think it's really important, and then sort of modelling as well what you could create for your students in the class and in a lesson. So creating that space that is safe, respecting the views of other people. And I think what's really important as well when we're talking about these topics, which are complex and ever changing, that you are learning and you might make mistakes and you need to ask questions, and not everyone's going to know everything about everything. So it's important that we sort of keep that in mind. So please post any questions, musings, thoughts as we go through, and we can have a look at the end. And again, if if something sort of comes to mind later on or at the end of the session, then you're of course obviously welcome to email me at the email below. So I'll talk you through now, initially looking at gender stereotypes. So we'll all have experienced stereotypes. So when I teach, so psychology is my main sort of background. So when I'm teaching psychology, we have a module on memory, and I teach the kids about how we've got so much stimuli around us, we need to process all this information really quickly, and we're very clever, we are able to do that. But in order to do that, we create sort of schemas, so we create boxes and perceptions about things in order to kind of make the processing quicker. But an issue with that is that we develop and create stereotypes about groups, and this can be stereotypes about gender, race, sexuality, language, nationality, culture, whatever it might be. Will box people up and have a particular perception about them. So I think and we see this as demonstrated in the picture. This is just sort of one of the many thousands, as you can imagine, and because when you walk into supermarkets, and particularly kind of guilty for it actually, but maybe that's because it's my perception, because we're probably in a supermarket more often than high street shops anymore, but they'll have the sort of the boys and the girls segregated items. Here you're thinking, okay, great, we've got a pink chemistry set, it's a chemistry set, it's STEM, but then, well, why did it have to be sort of coded in that way? Is that why does it need to be sort of made to be pink? Why does it need to have that sort of glamorous focus on it? Can we not just have non-gender, gender neutral toys for children? Because they're not necessarily thinking, they shouldn't have to be thinking about whether something is permissible for them to be playing with. And really these gender stereotypes start as soon as a child is conceived. Really think about the gender reveal parties, and a lot of this, it might not be done with, it won't be done with ill intent, buying gifts for children, but actually the impact can be huge. So I'll talk about that now in the next slide. So in terms of the impact, I've just sort of outlined a few key ones. I mean, obviously there's so much research in this area. Just try to sort of condense it down a little bit. But there are differences in gender expectations as a result of these stereotypes. So think about, and I kind of when it comes to the forefront of your mind, you might end up doing it more so. I mean, I was running a webinar on Tuesday actually, and one of the sort of teachers that's involved with gender action was saying that she did a little sort of mini study with her students just to test whether they did have these gender stereotypes. You know, she got them to sort of draw a fire person, a police person, all that kind of thing. And they did sort of attribute roles that were sort of leadership focused, that required kind of muscular strength, to be more focused on men. And so it was just sort of quite interesting to explore that. So in terms of differences in gender expectations, research has shown that when you're in a playground, you might see that some parents will, when they're dealing with their female children, they'll be less likely to sort of allow them to do physical tasks. They might be more cautious about their behaviour because that kind of physicality isn't associated with femininity, and therefore you're directly having an impact on that child's ability to play. My colleague was sort of saying the other day that when she was at the playground with her grandchildren, there was this child there in a quite a decadent dress, and it was directly impacting her ability to play, to move, to reach, to stretch. All of these things are having an impact on these children who are so young, and so the expectations will vary as a consequence of these stereotypes. So there can also be an impact on the brain development. So think about the toys that children are getting. So thinking about if we say that toys aimed at females are predominantly soft toys and cuddlies, and sort of things that will promote ideas of empathy and sort of language development, which you think, okay, that's great. But then the toys aimed at boys are things like fine motor skills, spatial awareness, kind of tolerance, in terms of if they're sort of putting something together and it doesn't work, that kind of thing. So it means that the two groups aren't crossing over. So boys aren't learning those essential skills of having a tea party with the toys and getting that language and that imagination. But then girls also aren't learning those key sort of fine motor skills. So it's having a direct impact on how their brain is developing at that young age. And then you come on to the children noticing it, because when they're really young, they might not be consciously aware of the group that they've been placed into. But then when they become aware, you'll notice, and I noticed as soon as my daughter went to school, she's 7 now, that there'll be potentially a rejection of certain activities that are sort of gender non-conforming at primary age. So it's as young as that. So research from Women in Sport have shown that girls around the age of 6 or 7 will start to perhaps reject certain sports that aren't considered to be as feminine. They're sort of saying things that they might feel self-conscious about. Sweating, all of those things is having an impact on their ability to sort of participate in activities. So if you're interested in that kind of area, Women in Sport, and of course the Youth Sport Trust are really great organisations focusing in on that. Then also, because you get the ridicule for gender norm violations. So gender non-conforming children will be perhaps bullied and tormented by their peers because they aren't fitting into the expectation. So and that's where things like having sort of gender neutral uniforms, so allowing children to express themselves in whatever way they see fit. So perhaps if a male student wanted to wear a dress or a skirt, whatever it might be, that they are accepted in that space because it is normalized. It is they feel allowed to be able to do it. And then of course, once we've sort of progressed from primary age, we go up to looking at their GCSE and A-level choices. So obviously for things of course like science and maths and English, it's fixed for GCSE. But the other subjects such as computing, DT, those predominantly are taken up by male students, and female students will be focusing more on humanities and excelling in those areas. And then this leads on to your A-level subjects as well. I mean, in social science, it's predominantly female led in terms of the teachers, but also in terms of the students. And if you think about, there was a piece of research actually done by Department of Education, and in 2015 there was a longitudinal study, so I think they started it in 2013, I want to say, and in 2015 they asked the students, there were about 10,000 students in this research, what they thought about STEM subjects, and some of the female participants, female students, were saying that they didn't feel that STEM subjects were as lucrative for them in terms of potential earnings later on. And I was thinking, well, I mean, they didn't analyze the results, this is just my kind of musings on it, but I'm thinking that, well, perhaps they didn't think that there was much prospect with STEM subjects because they're not seeing themselves in that role. They're not seeing evidence that women are progressing in those STEM subjects, and those what I consider to be more traditionally masculine subjects. So that's perhaps why, rather than them actually thinking, oh well, I won't be able to make money there, it's more that they can't, it's because they are them, their positionality, rather than the job itself. So that could be sort of something to look into. And then of course, once you've done your GCSEs, essentially done your A levels, and then whatever choice sort of goes from there, whether it's apprenticeship, universities, you still got that divide in the subjects, and of course that has an impact on students and then people becoming into the workplace and their ability to progress. So if male students are studying subjects which are going to be giving them more opportunities to have higher earning rights, then that of course creates that sort of gender divide there when it comes to earning rights and general rights in the workplace. Thinking about, I mean, as union members, you'll know, paternity pay, maternity leave, part-time requests, all of these sorts of things are sort of, I was at a conference the other I was gonna say the other week, it wasn't, it was about a year ago, but I was at a conference a while ago, and I said that an issue in my school is sexism. You have an issue of sexism in my school, and no one else kind of agreed. They were like, no, my school's fine. But then people started saying about that they were having issues with their maternity leave. The school was being funny with it, and I said, well, that is an issue of sexism. But people aren't necessarily sort of collating it like that or seeing it like that. So think about all that sort of extra labour that women are doing after they've done their full-time job, and then coming home and doing sort of household management, child management, and I think COVID really sort of highlighted that as well. So all of these have that kind of knock-on effect about what the stereotype and what the expectation is for that particular gender. So now I'll talk about specifically sexism in schools, and a report that was done in partnership with the NEU and UK Feminista, but this of course has been supported by NASUWT, Ofsted, and this is a sort of recognised evidence of sexism being very present in schools. And I think what was a key message from this research was that assume it's happening, assume that it's happening, and go from there. Kind of own it, and then we can sort of work on it from there. So this report, it was about 1,500 students, and they were surveyed, so given questionnaires in school and teachers as well. And I think just as a sort of side note, if you did want to do the survey, you can go onto the UK Feminista site and print it out from there, or create a Google Doc equivalent. So it is possible to kind of replicate this study if you wanted to do it in your school. So in terms of the findings, I think some of them they probably won't be that shocking to you. So we've got over a third of female students, these are all at mixed sex schools, have experienced some form of sexual harassment at school. And I think that's what's really key about that, is that if anyone sort of is familiar with doing surveys and things, is that that's their perception of sexual harassment. So it's likely that perhaps that figure could be higher because they might not have classed some things as sexual harassment. So I think that's always sort of important to note when we're looking at these statistics, that's their interpretation of it, but actually more may have happened that they haven't sort of recognised it as such. So also almost a quarter of female students have been subjected to unwanted physical touching, and in the research finding that it was particularly happening sort of at break time in the corridors. And you think these are supposed to be safe spaces where the students are moving around, going to their next lesson, there are teachers around, but it's still happening. I mean, we've got in my school we've got nearly 2,000 students, so that's it's a lot of bodies in a relatively small space. So things are going to happen which you're not going to be able to see or react on really quickly, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So 64% of teachers are hearing sexist language on at least a weekly basis, and 66% of female students and 37% of male students having experienced or witnessed sexist language in school in sort of overall. And then over a quarter of teachers hearing sexist language on a daily basis. And of course, if you're hearing something on a daily basis, it means that your subject you're teaching is predominantly made up of behaviour management, or however you want to sort of call it, rather than actually teaching, which is what we want to do, right? And it's really hard because young people, from this report and from the Ofsted report, as in the Ofsted research, finding that young people are feeling ignored by staff members, and that they're perhaps interpreting it as banter rather than it actually being misogynistic, discriminatory, offensive behaviour. And girls feeling that they had to educate the boys themselves because it just wasn't being done sufficiently in school, which I think is really sad. That the idea that they feel completely helpless, that they're having to do the education themselves, and of course that will come with it a lot of issues in itself. So yeah, and also sort of 1 in 3 teachers witnessing sexual harassment in their school on at least a weekly basis, and a similar amount for termly. And I think what's really key, actually, and this was sort of mentioned at the end of the last session, but I'll say it now just in case I forget, that when we're talking about sexism in schools, and I think it's really important because I love working with teachers, and for me, and obviously as a unionist, like the rest of you, very much an advocate for we're not just talking about the students, we're also talking about the teachers. So your experiences of sexism in schools is also not acceptable, and this is actually my passion for this kind of area. I mean, I've only been teaching for 4 years. I mean, I had a previous life I worked for Women's Sport and Women in Prison. I've worked in other organisations, sort of in female empowerment organisations. But I think what made me really passionate specifically about sort of the education sector when I came in was about the treatment of staff and how it was sort of ignored and undermined, and how I was treated differently to other members of staff. And I think, sort of keep that in mind, and like we said at the end of the last session, sort of use your union to get that support if you are experiencing any sexism in school, because that is also completely legitimate to sort of bring that to the forefront. So also I'll talk about now other factors to consider. I mean, there are absolutely loads, but I've kind of focused down on these ones because I think they're particularly important, and some of them are a bit more nuanced. So thinking about the difference between equity versus equality. So I teach this, I can't remember what subject I teach this in. I think maybe sociology, maybe psychology. I tend to do a lot of my lessons are basically not a lot of curriculum content, a lot of social justice content, whether it's relevant or not. But I like giving this example. So if we're thinking about equity versus equality, so the toilets in my school, for example, we've got brand new toilets for the students, and say I don't know how many cubicles they have, but say they've got 6 cubicles each. Well, the queue for the female toilet is always about 20 at break time, and hardly any. about 0, or the boys are in and out for their one, and thinking, right, well, they've got an equal number of toilets, but actually it's not addressing the actual needs of the students or the staff, whoever it might be. So thinking about, and if you've just been to the bladder session, you'll have heard about sort of women being more susceptible to UTIs than the average. Menstruation, all of those factors would mean that we need perhaps more toilets, or we're going to take longer in the toilet, so therefore need more to reduce any sort of queue. So just sort of considering that, and that might be something that might have to be kind of drawn out and explained to SLT or the head teacher, who might say, oh, but we've got these fair policies, but actually is it actually catering for the people that we want to in the way that we want to? And that sort of leads on to talking about sort of intersectionality. So Black female students being at a higher rate of sort of sexualization, and mixing in the racism with misogyny as well. Other vulnerable students include trans students, those from the LGBT plus community, disabled students. All of these students are particularly vulnerable, and need to have different kind of considerations and provisions in place, or recognition in place, about how these intersections come together and accumulate on top of each other. So I mean, this is why we have sort of targets for representation in Parliament, with the 50-50 campaign. Diane Abbott has been victim of a lot of abuse in her role, and has spoken out about that, relative to her white sort of counterparts. So it's recognising those kind of differing needs, and that we're not all starting off at the same starting point. We're not starting off with the same opportunities. And then mental health. So all of these things have an impact on mental health, and this is for boys and girls. I mean, there's a lot of work going on at the moment about sort of recognition of men's mental health, and coming out and talking about their experiences. And the same should be for girls, that they should feel that they can actually report information. So when I did a survey actually at my school a couple of years ago about students' experiences of sexism, and I think I've got about 200 respondents actually. We also do focus groups with the sixth formers, but when they said, one of the questions was asking, like, why didn't you report, if this has happened, did you report it? And the majority of students said no. And then when they were asked about why they didn't report it, they said, well, because what's the point? They were kind of apathetic and feeling that there's no point in reporting it, which is really devastating, that they think that they're in a situation where they shouldn't bother, that it's not worth it. And some of them saying that there are worse things going on in the world, and it's not a competition for that. So it's just, and all of this will have an impact on their mental health, and then of course, as that will impact on attendance and success at school, all of those sorts of things. So then finally, sort of online influences, the access to phones. I mean, some schools will have a no phone policy, all of that. Some will have a little bit here and there, but regardless, actually, the kids will be on their phones as soon as they exit the building, either way. And so they're still getting, I think the average is about kind of like 8 hours or something a day. Like one of my sixth formers said that he just, you get these sort of iPhone notifications of what your percentage is for that week, and his average a day was like 8.5 hours a day online. And if you think about all of the content that they're getting, and online influencers like Andrew Tate, and the impact that those can have on mental health, and he's got heavily misogynistic, heavily racist rhetoric around him. So as I said, I do sort of a consultancy work around this. So if anyone is interested in attending one of my webinars on that, the QR code is on the board there, and I think they'll post the link into the chat as well. So that's a sort of separate thing that I do. But if you did want sort of more information, I run sessions for parents and educators, so talking to young people about those topics. So if you're interested in that, feel free to scan that and have a look. So thinking about also things like pornography and the online space there, representation of violence against women, unrealistic body ideals, and then sort of that lack of acknowledgement for positive sort of male role models in the space as well. So now we'll have a look at what you can do to sort of, I mean, I say, tackle these issues in school. I think what's really important and what's really key. So when you sign up to, I'll just explain sort of background about gender action, not making a little sense. But when you sign up to gender action, you fill out a form, and what's significant about that form is that the head teacher or a member of SLT will have had to have signed it to say, yes, we acknowledge that we want to tackle sort of gender inequity and gender stereotyping at our school. And from that, you'll get support from us, access to all the resources, you get a little sticker that you can use on your website, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And what's really key is what we want. The reason that we get the head teacher or SLT or whoever it is to sign it is so that even if you leave, as we know, the retention rate for teachers is, even if you leave, your work continues. So it is just embedded in there. It's just normal. It's not, Miss Watson name. It's not their focus. It is everyone's problem, and that's what's really key. So in terms of what you can do, like education and training. So for this one, recognise and acknowledge I'm not an expert in every area. A lot of people won't be an expert in these areas, and this is why coming to these sessions that you're doing today is so fantastic, because you're able to sort of learn about completely new things, or just consolidate ideas that you already had, which is great, or add to the discussion. But I think what's really key is that this education and training is not just for educators, so not just for the classroom teachers, but also for support staff. I mean, in my school, we have, because it's so big, outside these infamous toilets, which I've already described, they have, we've got the supervisors, like the corridor sort of supervisors, and then obviously you've got other sort of canteen staff, all of these people that are involved with the students in some capacity, and may well see, they'll be seeing an onslaught of students in a very short space of time. The canteen's very busy, and these are the places where we're thinking that this is happening. They also need to be aware about what they're looking for, how they need to approach it, who they need to sort of report it to. That's really key. So it's not just the teachers in that classroom space; it's everyone involved. And this can be, this can be done as part of staff training days. This can be done as part of CPD. Options, if you kind of get a list of things that you have to sign up for. It's quite invariably, they're usually the same sort of CPDs on whatever model or memory retention or something like that. So sometimes it's quite nice to have a little bit of variation in there if you've done like the memory retention one for like 13 years in a row. So I ran on it was an after school one, actually. I did it a CPD session on similar to sort of this, talking about I think I was focusing specifically on the It's Just Everywhere kind of reports, because it was a little bit more recent then, and I'd just done my questionnaires in school. But it was great, and it was really nice to have that discussion with teachers, and you get to hear shocking things, and you get to hear hear of some allies as well who might be useful to get on board. And also sort of staff meetings, and kind of as part of your weekly bulletins, all of these kind of things and reminders in there. So moving on to sort of student voice. So student voice is obviously key, because these are the people that we're working with. But as I said before, teacher voice is also key. If a teacher is saying that they're experiencing something in school, perhaps from pupils or from other staff members, which I think is actually more common, then their voice is also paramount. But in terms of student voice, again, we don't want to create extra work for you, but I think you're probably, like me, the fact that you're here in the first place suggests to me that you're probably teachers that are already creating that safe space for students, that are already want to naturally kind of get involved with things in school for the development of the students, rather than whatever data it might be. So, I mean, I have a feminist society, for example. I mean, I'm now part-time, because I'm part-time doing this, but part-time teaching. So I'll run that every other week, you know, Friday lunchtime or whenever. It's quietened down over the last sort of couple of years, just because, as you all know, cohorts vary, don't they? But a couple of years ago, I had like 50 students at one session at one lunchtime club once. It was basically a feminist party, really. It was fantastic. But people would do presentations. We'd have discussions, eat lots of food. You know, it was just a great safe space, and I think that's what it's about, creating, kind of recognizing your sort of positionality in that space, but allowing the students in, having that environment where they feel that they can talk, they can open up, and just feel nice in that environment. And I was doing my most recent paper, I was interviewing teachers about their experiences of their perception of social justice in their space, in their kind of in their setting. One teacher was saying that they create an environment in their classroom where, you know, they've got posters, they've got you know, just inspirational images, like all of that kind of around to suggest you are welcome here. Like, you can come in and you can talk to me, and I am, you know, I'm for you. So yeah, I think it's sort of really important to consider that space for them. And again, of course, like, I think really simple things of just making sure, if anything, you know, if there are any reports, like following that, you know, following CPOMs, following any safeguarding guidance from the school. But just sort of, if you keep tabs on all of these things, then suddenly SLT, you know, they will recognise that this is happening quite a bit. So, you know, make sure that you do share the information going across. So in terms of curriculum, it's, you know, then it's hard because there aren't that many gaps in or space. You know, some of you will be working right up to the wire. I mean, they're you know, especially in secondary schools, when you are sort of up to Easter and you think, I can't fit anything more in. But actually, it's not necessarily about adding anything in. It's kind of going at things in a different way. I mean, it's easy for me to say because I teach social sciences, so you know, in sociology, I'm talking about feminist theory or whatever it might be. But I think the representation, like you said, that you have in the room, you know, comes down to recruitment as well. Like, who are the teachers? Like, what are their interests? Like, so if you're thinking about a maths, you know, if you're teaching maths, you might think, well, how the hell am I supposed to incorporate issues of sexism and racism, whatever, in this lesson? But actually, you can talk about, well, who developed that particular theory or whatever it might be. Bring that in. Like, think about the posters that are on the wall. Think about your career days. Like, who are they seeing in this space? And again, it's that hidden curriculum, so the students will know about your sort of views on the world. And I'm not talking political, but just your views on the world and the way that you sort of hold yourself in that space. Yeah, and so it's not necessarily about changing the curriculum, but kind of sort of bringing that hidden curriculum in as well. And of course, things like, you know, drama and English are easier to bring those themes in. And of course, primary, again, about creating that space for the students to talk about sort of challenging issues. And I mean, you know, my daughter talks about sort of experiencing racism in her school. So thinking about, like, what's the representation of the books? Is she seeing herself? Does she feel that she is kind of important in that space? Yeah, all of those sorts of things. There's sort of role models available as well, and that kind of leads on to the progression in jobs. So sort of talking similar to the curriculum, but a couple of people that I'm working with Gender Action, who are doing the Gender Action program now, saying that they have a career day and they make sure that there's representation of all people in these jobs, especially jobs that might be, you know, jobs that might be particularly gendered, that they have representation, so the kids say, oh yeah, that could be a possibility for me, regardless of how I identify. And I think it's important to acknowledge that not all students have started at the same point. So to sort of to recognise that and what they feel that the opportunities are for them. And then language. So language is a key aspect that we look at. And a lot of people involved in gender action want to tackle language. So these are simple things like, I mean, my colleague absolutely hates the term guys. They absolutely hates it. So just things like that, like really small, simple things that you can just check yourself and go, okay, let's not use that. Let's use more inclusive language for this space. Like I use team, for example, hi team, and that sort of people. And yeah, so that's quite a nice sort of, and if you have a good relationship with them, you can call them whatever you want, but it's just, yeah, it's nice to not have them that gendered sort of language, and recognizing that when you say, oh, can I have a, if you're in primary school, for example, can I have a strong boy to do this, and all of those little things which aren't meant with ill intent but do have an ongoing impact, as we've seen. And then just moving on to, and also actually language related to pronouns, and also staff, how staff are addressed is a challenging one, especially for sort of female members of staff with the Miss and the Mrs. Yeah, that is difficult, and it's something that could be raised. It was sort of noticed kind of in the school as being an issue. And then community, which is really key, and again another sort of area that people want to look at specifically. So parents can be fantastically supportive, or they can be sort of feel like a brick wall. And I think communication is really key. And then just identifying that all you are doing, like sticking to the facts, you're sticking to the facts. So you teaching healthy relationships in primary school is not, I had a teacher say to me that the parents thought that they were teaching them about sex at the age of 5. It's like, no, we're talking about healthy relationships. Like, give them the facts about what you're doing, how they can get involved, when they can come in, like give them things to look at, give them things to discuss. You're creating an intersectional, equitable society that will benefit everybody, and so everyone needs to be involved in that. So in terms of how we can support you, so I'll just sort of quickly go over this, but I mean, we already kind of mentioned at the beginning. So when you sign up, you get your sort of head teacher or SLT to sign it off, and then from there we give you access to the resources, as I said, and you get the little Twitter handles and all of that kind of stuff that you can add to the school website, and you can tell the parents about it, tell the other staff members about it, and then from there we kind of work on a tiered level. So from supporter, you then become an initiator, and when you work towards becoming an initiator, you do 3 times 2-hour training sessions with us, when we talk through similar sort of issues like we have today, and then we go through action planning. So with the action planning, you pick 2 aspects of the whole school approach, which I discussed on the previous slide, and we create an action plan together to how you can sort of tackle these areas in your school. And then once you've done that, you go up to, once you've sort of evidenced that, you can go up to champion level, and then beacon level is our kind of like exemplar school example. We've sort of tackled all of the ideas, and we haven't got any beacon schools yet, because obviously it's a journey. It's a longer process, as you can imagine, but we want to be able to get there and continue that as we go through. So yeah, if anyone sort of is interested in getting involved, it's free for schools to take part. As you said, it's funded by Mission 44, and so you can just drop me a direct email. You can go onto our site and have a look there, have an explore. Yeah, and it would just be sort of fantastic to get you involved. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for coming and speaking to us today, Angra.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully we'll see you again at another one of our consultation conferences.
That'd be fantastic.
Okay, thank you. Okay, everybody. It's lunchtime now. Next session starts at 2 o'clock. So I look forward to seeing you then.